Midnight. A jungle ridge somewhere east of the Chindwin River. A Japanese sentry leans against a tree. He's tired. He's bored. And he's convinced this sector is safe. Because the men across from him aren't real soldiers. That's what he's been told. That's what the officers keep saying at the fire, laughing between mouthfuls of rice. The British bring their servants to the front lines now. One of them jokes. Porters, coolies with rifles. The sentry smiles. He believes it. He doesn't know that 30 meters away, in the black wall of jungle, a man is lying motionless in the mud. Has been for 2 hours, not moving, barely breathing. He doesn't know that this man has already counted every soldier at the fire, memorized every weapon stacked against every tree, and marked in his mind exactly who will die first. The sentry checks his watch. 0200 hours. He never checks it again. There is no gunshot, no shout, no warning. Just a shape rising out of the dark like the jungle itself decided to kill him. And then silence. By dawn, the Japanese command will find 11 of their men. Some with their throats opened in a single motion. Some simply, gone missing, vanished into a jungle that until last night they believed they controlled. And carved into the wet earth near the ashes of the campfire, a message left deliberately. A warning, in broken English, meant for the next patrol, the porters send their regards. This is the story of the men the British Empire almost didn't use. The soldiers dismissed for a century as laborers, hillmen, baggage carriers, good for digging trenches, not fit to hold a rifle. This is the story of the Gurkhas, and the 18 inches of curved steel that turned an insult into the most feared sound in the entire Pacific and Burma theater. To understand why the Gurkhas became legend, you have to understand how badly the Allies were losing before them. Burma is collapsing. The Japanese army isn't just winning battles, it's humiliating entire divisions. British, Indian, and Commonwealth forces are being pushed back nearly 1,000 miles in what will become the longest retreat in British military history. The reason isn't cowardice. It's terrain, and it's tactics. The jungle in Burma isn't like the deserts of North Africa or the open fields of Europe. Visibility drops to a few meters. Radios fail. Maps are useless because the jungle simply swallows landmarks whole. And the Japanese soldier, in 1942, is a different kind of enemy. Trained to move at night. Trained to infiltrate behind lines silently, then attack from the rear where a unit's supply, its officers, its wounded, all sit exposed. Standard infantry tactics built for open ground, built for clear sightlines collapse in this environment. British units that had trained for years on parade grounds in India find themselves ambushed by men they never saw, never heard, until it was too late. Soldiers begin to whisper about something worse than bullets, the fear of the unknown jungle itself. Men crack not from wounds, but from nights spent listening to sounds they can't identify, waiting for an attack that could come from any direction, at any second. Commanders need something different. Not more firepower, not more men. They need soldiers who can survive and dominate in a place where the rulebook doesn't apply. Soldiers comfortable with silence, comfortable with steep terrain, comfortable moving without being seen or heard. The British Empire has exactly that kind of soldier already serving in its ranks. They've had them for over a century. And for over a century, they've mostly used them wrong. The Gurkhas come from the hill villages of Nepal Gurkha, Magar, Gurung, Rai, Limbi communities, where life itself is a daily negotiation with brutal terrain, steep mountain paths, thin air, physical labor from childhood. The British first encountered them in 1814 during the Anglo-Nepalese War and were stunned. Small in stature, often outnumbered, the Gurkha soldiers fought with a ferocity that impressed even the officers sent to defeat them. One British commander wrote that he had never seen men cling to a position with such tenacity or resist with such reckless courage. The war ended in a treaty. And with that treaty came a decision that would define the next 200 years. The British began recruiting Gurkhas directly into their own army. But recruitment is not the same as respect. For generations, Gurkha regiments were treated as a peculiar curiosity, useful for garrison duty, useful for hard labor, useful in the trenches of the First World War digging under fire, while others got the medals. Brave, yes. Loyal, yes. But rarely trusted with independent, high-stakes combat roles the way British or elite units were. By the early years of the Second World War, that reputation still lingers. Some senior officers view Gurkha battalions as reliable but unremarkable good for holding a line, not for the kind of specialized, nerve-shredding work the jungle war now demands. It takes catastrophe to change minds. As Burma burns and units disintegrate under Japanese infiltration tactics, a handful of officers' men who had actually served alongside Gurkha soldiers who had seen them move through terrain no map could describe start pushing back against the old assumptions. They argue something radical for the time, that the Gurkhas aren't just capable of fighting in this environment, they're built for it. Villages in the Himalayan foothills raise children who can walk 20 miles of vertical terrain before breakfast. Children who track animals for food. Children who understand, instinctively, how to move without being seen. How to listen to a forest and know what doesn't belong in it. It isn't training these officers or asking command to trust. It's a way of life. Slowly, reluctantly, in some quarters Gurkha units are pushed into a new role. Not garrison troops. Not diggers. Frontline jungle fighters, tasked with the missions regular infantry can't survive. Night patrols, close reconnaissance, ambushes deep in Japanese-held territory. The men who once dug the trenches are about to become the men the enemy has nightmares about. And they're about to do it carrying a weapon most Western armies had long dismissed as a ceremonial relic. Picture a British quartermaster, somewhere in 1942, inspecting Gurkha equipment for standardization. He sees rifles. Good. Standard issue. Functional. Then he sees it. Strapped to each man's belt, a curved blade, roughly 18 inches long, heavy at the tip, with a strange forward-leaning shape unlike any bayonet or sword in the British arsenal. It's called a Kukri. To Western eyes trained on straight blades and parade ground sabers, it looks almost comical. Too short to be a sword. Too curved to be practical. Some officers privately dismiss it as folk tradition, a ceremonial item the Gurkhas carry out of cultural habit. Not a real weapon of modern war. They are catastrophically wrong. The Kukri's curve isn't decoration, it's physics. Because the blade curves forward, the weight of the weapon shifts toward the tip. That means every swing carries more momentum than a straight blade of the same length, turning a hand strike into something closer to a small axe. In close quarters, in total darkness, in a fight where a rifle's report would give away an entire patrol's position, the Kukri does something no firearm can. It kills in complete silence. Word spreads slowly through Allied ranks, first as rumor, then as reputation. Gurkha soldiers, on night patrols, don't fire when they encounter a lone enemy sentry. They close the distance, and they finish it with steel. There's a story repeated so often across different units that historians can't pin down its exact origin, but soldiers on the ground believed it completely, that a Gurkha Kukri is never drawn without drawing blood, even if that means, symbolically, nicking one's own thumb before sheathing it again. True or not, the legend itself becomes a psychological weapon. Enemy soldiers start to believe it too. British and American troops fighting alongside Gurkha units begin requesting to serve near them, not out of curiosity, but because they've seen what happens on the nights the Gurkhas go out on patrol. Silence, then at dawn. Japanese positions found abandoned, or worse, found still occupied by men who never had the chance to raise an alarm. What looked, to a skeptical quartermaster, like an outdated relic turns out to be the perfect weapon for the exact kind of war Burma had become. No muzzle flash, no noise, no warning. Just the enemy's absolute certainty that somewhere in the dark, a blade is already closer to them than they think. Here is what almost no military report captures, but every survivor's account confirms. The Kukri's greatest weapon wasn't the wound it caused. It was the fear it created before any wound was ever made. Put yourself in the mind of a Japanese soldier posted in the Burmese jungle in 1943 or 44. You've been trained, extensively, to fight a certain kind of war discipline charges, coordinated ambushes, the crack of rifle fire signaling contact. You know how to react to bullets. Your body has been drilled for that specific kind of danger. But the Gurkhas don't give you that fight. They take away the one thing every soldier depends on to survive. Warning. Patrol after patrol, Japanese units report the same unnerving pattern. Sentries who simply don't respond to the morning roll call. No gunfire heard in the night. No struggle reported. Just absence, and sometimes worse than absence, bodies found by comrades in the morning light, with wounds that told a story no one wanted to hear. A single, silent strike, delivered by someone who had been close enough to touch them before they ever knew an enemy was there. This is where the psychology turns. Fear doesn't spread through casualty numbers. It spreads through stories soldiers telling soldiers, in hushed voices, about the ghost troops who move without sound. Rumors grow with each retelling. Some Japanese accounts, recorded after the war, describe genuine dread among troops assigned to sectors where Gurkha units operated a fear that went beyond ordinary combat stress into something closer to superstition. Training breaks down under that kind of pressure. Soldiers who are taught to hold formation, to trust their perimeter, to sleep in rotating watch shifts, start abandoning discipline. Some units reportedly began firing at shadows, at animals, at nothing at all, because the alternative, staying still and trusting the dark, had become unbearable. And that's the real function of psychological warfare. It doesn't need to kill every enemy soldier. It only needs to convince the rest that they might be next, and that no amount of training will save them. By the middle years of the Burma campaign, Gurkha has become more than a unit designation to Japanese forces. It has become a word soldiers use the way children use the word monster, not entirely rational, but deeply viscerally real to the men lying awake in the dark, listening. The porters they mocked at the campfire 2 years earlier are now the reason entire units request reassignment away from certain sectors of the front. Not every commander learned this lesson in time, and the cost of that arrogance is written into the record for anyone willing to look. Take one clear example of success. During operations to reclaim key positions along the jungle front, Gurkha units are deployed for exactly the kind of high-risk infiltration missions their critics once said they were unfit for. Moving at night through terrain considered impassable by conventional standards, they locate and neutralize forward Japanese positions silently, before dawn clearing the way for a larger assault that would otherwise have walked directly into prepared defenses. The operation succeeds with a fraction of the casualties commanders had projected. Officers who once viewed Gurkha battalions as secondary support troops file after action reports specifically requesting them for future infiltration missions. The transformation, on paper, is complete, from laborers to the most requested specialists in the theater. But contrast that with the sectors where old thinking never changed. In pockets of the wider war, units without Gurkha support, or commanders who dismissed unconventional jungle tactics as unnecessary, continued relying on standard daylight assaults against dug in Japanese positions. The result, again and again, was the same grinding attrition that had defined the retreat of 1942. Heavy frontal casualties against an enemy who had mastered defensive infiltration warfare. Historians looking back at the Burma campaign point to this exact contrast as one of its most painful lessons. Where commanders adapted where they trusted unconventional soldiers and unconventional weapons, casualties dropped, and ground was retaken efficiently. Where arrogance persisted, where the old hierarchy of real soldiers versus support troops held firm, the human cost climbed, needlessly, in places where a different decision might have saved lives. It's a brutal irony. The very soldiers once mocked as too primitive for modern war were, in practice, running the most sophisticated tactical playbook in the entire theater, and the officers who refused to see that paid for it in the one currency that matters most in war. Men, by the war's end, the numbers alone tell a staggering story. Roughly 250,000 Gurkha soldiers served during the Second World War. Thousands gave their lives. 10 Victoria Crosses, the British Commonwealth's highest award for valor, were earned by Gurkha soldiers in that conflict alone, a number that speaks louder than any recruitment poster ever could. Japanese veterans, in post-war interviews and memoirs, would describe the Gurkhas not with the language of ordinary combat reports, but with something closer to reverence, the kind reserved for an enemy so effective, so relentless. That respect became the only honest response. And the Kukri, that ceremonial curiosity a skeptical quartermaster once glanced at and nearly dismissed, became in the decades that followed one of the most recognized and feared symbols in modern military history. Gurkha regiments still serve today, in the British and Indian armies, still carrying that same curved blade, still carrying the same reputation their grandfathers built in the mud and silence of the Burmese jungle. Go back one more time to that ridge east of the Chindwin, to the fire, to the laughter. The British bring their servants to the front lines now, porters, coolies with rifles. That sentry never got to finish laughing, because in the dark beyond his fire, the porters weren't carrying supplies. They were carrying 200 years of being underestimated and 18 inches of curved steel that was about to make sure no one ever made that mistake again. The Kukri came out, and history changed its mind about who the real soldiers were.